Welcome to the Art Garage. In our 10th year serving the community of artists and art lovers. We are located just outside of Cooperstown, New York. And today we are presenting our second Zoom program, a hybrid with a small live audience and a larger Zoom audience that includes people in the Netherlands and from Sweden. The Art Garage, as the name implies, has galleries that are one bay, the size of a one-car bay. Today we are hosting an exhibition of three of the preeminent area artists. They are Ashley Norwood Cooper, Tracy Helgeson, and Marcy Schwartzman. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Ashley Norwood Cooper, who will take us on a tour of her art and what she is thinking. Ashley, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence today and also for being willing to share your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to start with these bee sculptures over here, which are found objects. I make my bees out of things like, a lot of them are made out of paper face masks and echinacea blossoms, echinacea seed pods for eyes, screen for the wings, and then I just sort of coat it all in really chunky, messy, fun plaster and paint them in encaustic, which is a wax. It's beeswax with pigment. So each bee is different. A lot of my art is inspired by my own experiences, and also often I read a lot of poetry, which I find inspires art. And these, in particular, I've been thinking about all the beekeepers in our area and my friends that are beekeepers, but also about these Virgil's Fourth Georgic, which is all about beekeeping. I've been reading that a lot. I kind of see my bees as like little aging ballerinas, sort of tumbling through space. They're kind of clumsy bees, but to me beautiful, and I like the shapes they make between them as much as the shapes of the bees. And then I've been doing these paintings, but the first three paintings are also continuing the theme of bees. So this one is called Water Moccasin, and it is inspired by, particularly this one by Virgil's Fourth Georgic, in which a young woman named Eurydice is being chased by the beekeeper through the woods, and she steps on a snake and is bitten and dies. So, and the water moccasin, however, is like just a childhood fear of mine from growing up down south. All the creeks we played in and the rivers we swam, and the lakes we swam in had water moccasins, and we were terrified of them. They never seemed to bother anybody, but it was like a really terrifying thing to me. So the next one is a beekeeper. It's actually, I guess, one of the first of my bee paintings, and one where I was really interested in the sort of atmospheric way that I could make her disappear behind her veil, and then all of these yellow and black shapes sort of floating up. It was my initial interest in the bees was partly just formal, just like the way a repeated shape holds together a composition was a big part of what got me into painting. First butterflies and then bees, and just sort of a general interest in insects. And here's another beekeeper with a smoker. This one has a smoker. And a similar sort of idea. And then this one is about lightning bugs. So during the summer of 2020, I had been painting mostly interior domestic scenes and some picnic scenes. But during the summer of 2020, when we didn't go anywhere and I was walking along through the woods every day, I would walk, people are from Cooperstown, through the woods by Indian Burial Ground every day. And there would be all these vultures above my head. And then at night there were, it seemed to me, and maybe it's my imagination, the fireflies were making a comeback. And I don't know if there was like a relationship between the lack of human, like less human activity and the fireflies coming back. I don't know, but all of a sudden, these fireflies that I remembered from my childhood were back in the woods. And so I started painting fireflies. And I've always been interested in light and the way it changes color and affects form. So this is a firefly painting. This is one of my picnic paintings. I did a lot of picnics and I've done a lot of macaroni and cheese. People kind of, I guess, relate my paintings to these macaroni and cheese. And this one was, as it seemed like the things around me were coming apart. I guess I'd always seen the picnics as kind of an Americanized idea of a vanitas, like something where we're outside with our fried chicken and stuff, but things are kind of dying. and so maybe it went even further with the picnic, with the storm arriving and the macaroni and cheese starting to suck up into the storm. I actually did this before the bee paintings, and when I brought it to the show, I was like, really, the macaroni and cheese is like already turning into bees. But it kind of, macaroni and cheese that can fly. If you want macaroni and cheese that can fly, you paint bees. This is another picnic painting. I was really interested in the glass table, and I don't know if they show you the image of the PowerPoint, if you can see it, but you can see through this table and you can see people's feet underneath the table and legs underneath the table. I was interested in sort of arranging this kind of clock-like arrangement on the square surface also, and the way the arms went around. And I've been doing a lot of paintings where you're sort of in the point of view of one person. So this sort of headless person there, you can kind of be in her space. Again, macaroni and cheese and peas, and just things that I think are fun to paint. This one is called More Kissing. And it's sort of part of a series of kissing paintings that really upset my son. So then they became More Kissing, just because I was almost painting them in order to upset my 14-year-old son. And then this is a strange painting, and I was kind of happy that somebody wanted to show it, actually, because it's so weird. But I was really grappling in my studio with how to portray vulnerable masculinity. And I hadn't really resolved it, and I didn't know if I could resolve it. And almost as a joke with myself, I was like, I'm going to paint Bigfoot crying. So this is Bigfoot chopping onions and crying. So that's your little tour, and you can ask questions, I guess.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
For you. So, Ashley, do you begin with a drawing?
How, I mean, these are beautifully composed, despite the sense that they are very rapidly created, which I think is a very false sense. But how do you do?
Most
you start
things.
with pencil?
I draw in my sketchbook, mostly very small rectangles and squares, and I make these little shapes that are really simple in them. Because I'm just working out, like, if this, I would be almost with straight lines, like these are going to be the shapes behind his head. Or, you know, this is going to go around this way. I haven't really worked anything out. And I work them out in paint. And they're probably less rapidly painted than they look. The mark making tends to be fast, but there's a lot of building up, and there's also actually a lot of scraping down.
until I get the right moment. And that's like an amazing quality of oil paint, that it stays wet for a really long time, that you can scrape it off, that you can work over it, that you can thin it out and almost treat it like a watercolor, or paint it really thick with a palette knife. And I tend to have all those things happening in a single painting. Like I'm really into having places where the paint is thin and glazy and places where it's thick. I paint with my hands, paint with a palette knife. I make little jars of really thin paint and throw them. You know, it's a very sort of messy process. But I kind of believe that when you know what the painting is going to look like, it's done. Like it has to, all the idea has to be completed in paint, not in your head. So I want to have a lot of questions when I start a painting that I think I'll work out. If that makes sense.
I also have a question. Have you ever had a painting that you had a vision of what you wanted, but then it turned into something completely different?
Yeah, every painting. And the most unsuccessful paintings are the ones where the vision is so locked in my head that I can't keep changing things as I'm going along. Those usually don't work. Like when you're really clear with what it's going to look like, it doesn't work. I think having painted for 25 years, that I've gotten so I can paint in my head. So now I'm kind of trying to trip myself up so that I can't work it out in my head, if that makes some sense.
How do you mean? Like, can you elaborate?
Like, I mean, I can lie in bed and paint in my head. I painted in labor to distract myself from the pain. Like I can just paint in my head, but I don't want to. I want to make a mess and then work it out to the point that I want it worked out. Like I want to respond to what I see, not to what I'm imagining entirely. Like once the paint starts to get moving around the canvas, I want to keep responding and changing as I go along.
And do you have an artist that has been a huge inspiration to you, or somebody that you admire, for instance, that when you look at their paintings, their paintings, they speak to you, for instance?
You know, at different people at different times in my life, but I think I keep coming back to Bruegel and to Bonnard.
Oh.
And probably to Joan Mitchell, actually. I really like Joan Mitchell and her abstract paintings and the way they relate to nature is interesting to me.
Have you done any painting, for instance, of a woman in a tub, since you mentioned?
I have painted women in tubs, yes.
Yeah, and that's where the Bonnard comes in, that you were.
Yeah, but it's more about that. I have this whole thing with Bonnard where I actually think he's the first housewife painter, because I think he actually lived in a house with his wife, and I feel like he made his own lunch. Like I just believe he made his own lunch, and that makes me really happy because none of those men did. I feel like they were way out in the woods at La Canette, and it was hard, and he had to bring firewood up, you know, it was like real. And I feel like he didn't set up in front of things. I think he memorized his life. And particularly when I was home with little children, I was really inspired by that. And the fact that I could like sit there with toddlers and be like watching them so they don't hurt themselves, but also like watching the way the light comes in the window and hits this. And then I could take that back, and the act of remembering it helps abstract it, helps create this kind of wall between you and the work that kind of allows the art to come in, if that makes sense.
We have a question that's come in from, I can't see who, but Ashley. While the topics of your paintings are interesting, could you talk a little about process and technique? For example, your strategy for the use of primary and secondary colors, particularly the primary yellow.
Yellow. Well, because the bees, I guess. I really think of color in very specific terms, in terms of value, saturation, and hue. And I think of relationships between hue and saturation more than I think of relationships between value. A lot of times our values are pretty close together. And I'm often interested in something like, if we come over here, like this snake. something I can set up with like all these different shades of green in the grass or all these different shades of red and orange in the snake, and the way these hues hold together tightly and how a little bit of difference defines something. I guess the same with the bees. I mean, with the bees, I'm really interested in all of these repeated shapes and how they hold the thing together, and kind of carry your eye, and maybe set up time in there. But I'm also interested in like these more atmospheric, less saturated colors that are in the background that sort of, and then these repeated shapes that are more saturated. And I use technique. These bees are probably painted with palette knife and my hand. And I used paint sticks, pigment sticks. I think that silver is pigment stick. I know that the what do you call this? The hive, not a hive, like this tray, honeycomb is bubble wrap that I painted over and squished down. This is probably like a lot of palette knife in here. These green grass is more paint stick. And with the sculptures and the encaustic, I think I never did sculpture until I could figure out a way that related to the way I paint. That was really as immediate and where messy, unexpected things would happen and I could respond to them.
I love the process of combining memory with observation. So here, another question. I've noticed that you thickly apply pigment, which creates rhythm and a sense of movement. Yellow, for example, is not the same where applied thickly because of the light and shadow of the texture. I somehow think of the colors in Hans Hofmann's canvases, 1953 yellow vase, for example.
Yes, so that push and pull idea is there. And the idea that there's a tension between the surface, it's built up from the surface, literally it's built up, and certain colors, because of their intensity, should come forward from the surface, and then some colors go back. And that is Hans Hofmann. I mean, that's what he taught so many American painters and changed American painting by teaching it. So that's great. I love that.
Good call, Robert. There seems to be a foreshortening in your canvases. Do you ever work from photographs?
No. And the space and the shapes, the space doesn't work in that kind of a expected way. I mean, perspective isn't right in my paintings. I'm more interested in color space than in literal perspectival relationships. And a lot of time, I mean, almost always the surface sort of pulls up if there is a surface. And obviously not the surface, but the floor or the table comes up. And of course, in this one, it's kind of extreme, like almost above it. But I am interested in space and the way color makes space. And sometimes things get smaller in space, but getting accurate perspectival relationships isn't important to me. And as I said, that like the way that memory changes something is really important to me. So if I look at a photograph, like if I'm going to paint a fox and I can't remember exactly what a fox looks like, I'll look at some photographs of foxes and then I put them away and paint the fox.
So I have a question that goes back to the classics. I mean, this one in particular makes me wonder if you've been looking at the Pompeii frescoes.
Yes. You know what I look at is I love the Pompeii frescoes. I love the classics. I love
This
Virgil.
one to me.
This one.
Okay.
And I also really love, because I think they're just a total painting lesson, the mosaics, the ancient mosaics, because it's like one color against one color against one color, and these real clear decisions. And when I feel like I'm forgetting how to paint, I'll look at mosaic paintings. But I am very interested in not in recreating something that looks classical, but I am interested in these archetypal themes that go way, way back in history.
I mean, this face here with those to me, that one in particular, or a touch of Byzantine. I mean, it's just really is classic and ancient. as well as contemporary. Do we have other questions? So storms. I mean, in this small exhibit, you have the storm taking over the macaroni picnic, and you have a sense of storm.
And swarms and storms. I mean, chaos is always a big part of it. That may just be me and my life and not really explainable beyond that, but I don't know. I don't think I think the Dionysian is more interesting to me than the Apollonian in a lot of cases. And I think that's just because I'm a little like that. But yeah, I am interested in the picnic as this very happy, idyllic thing that never goes right. So I guess the storm really takes that is an example of that.
I mean, it's very topical today, too.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like extreme weather.
Yeah, and bees also are something that we are
Very
problems
topical.
with now also.
And that touches upon how you like to paint because of all the things that vex you about the world.
Yes.
And I guess it's your response in part. Here's another question. Oils or acrylics?
Oils, always oils.
Any reason, why oils? Why not
Because they
acrylic?
don't dry. And I like the way they smell. But they they take a really long time to dry, and so I can go back and scrape down and keep working, and they dry in different places. Like there's one way you work with them when they're really, really wet, and one way when they're sort of tacky, and then so I like that about oils. And I also, it's gotten so that people almost can't tell. So the acrylic paints are kind of amazing, but I still kind of like, there's something buttery and rich about the oils that I think is still distinct.
Not a question really, but I have the feeling the paint of this series is more quiet. Palette of this series is more quiet than what I have seen previously. Is this
It
series
may
more
be that
quiet?
these are getting a little bit, like I'm interested in a little bit of a quieter background so that those bright yellow bees can float around on it and be seen.
Because the new work definitely does have that slightly more subdued palette than the slightly older work on the right,
That's
such as the
probably true. Yeah.
gigantic picnic.
Mhm.
Okay, do you make macaroni and cheese?
I do. I love macaroni and cheese. Yeah. And each of the noodles, they each like fit together differently, so that's kind of fun to paint. I don't know, like they're, yeah.
It's really very fascinating how your pictures, they all tell a story and how you interconnect those stories with your images. So you're a storyteller as well as a visual artist. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It is. And you tell the story in your mind and you kind of build a picture in your head and then you just go from there.
Right. And some of it is obviously not gonna read to people, but it keeps me painting, like pacing and talking to myself and telling myself stories and reading things and then going back and painting. It just keeps me going with it.
And you said that you paint how many hours per day approximately? I'm not sure if you mentioned.
Probably paint about 4 hours a day.
Do you like to paint in daylight or can you paint at night in any studio?
I usually paint in daylight. In the winter, if I can't find any, I'd like for the light to come through the skylights in the studio and that. But I have lighting in my studio, it's not all natural.
And so per year, you said that you create approximately how many per year?
If they're big ones, I do some that are bigger than I have 30 or 40 paintings a year, I would say. Well, I don't really count, but
You're having a solo exhibition at Fenimore Art Museum in a
in
few
2023,
years.
so I'm painting like insanely, and I'm trying to do enough bees to fill that anteroom and downstairs gallery.
You will be in the gallery that this year hosted the Keith Haring show.
Yes.
Congratulations.
So it's
Ashley.
huge, so I gotta paint a lot this year. But it's 2023. So I'll get it. And I have a lot already, so it'll be good, yeah.
Tell us about the online exhibition in London that you were in, which I hadn't realized was online initially. What was that show?
That was Tamor Gran in London, and it was just an online exhibition during COVID. I think he did a number of viewing rooms. I think you can still see that, maybe not, I'm not sure. It's still online, but that was on, and then I had a show in Seattle at St. Contemporary it was this summer, and I'll have another show in Seattle at St. Contemporary next summer. And I think I'm probably showing with Susan Ely and Hudson. I have a show next summer, a 2-person show, I think, at the Albany Airport Gallery. And I think I'm doing something at Greenville County Museum of Art in 2023.
Fantastic.
So
You're
lots of
busy.
things coming.
We have another question here. I wonder what is your take on filling the canvas to the edge? What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, how I crop it, is that what they mean?
Sometimes
I
it's
think a
not-
lot of times I'm just interested in like a shape at the edge, or like these different shapes coming in around the edge.
the way they're trying to do it.
Yeah, and a lot of things go off the edge.
And maybe that's in like how I think of ideas for paintings, making these little squares and rectangles, because I'm really just like coming in and cutting them up into shapes.
None of these paintings seems to be framed. Is this your choice? Do you?
Yeah, they're all on, these paintings and all the smaller things are on wood panel.
And I don't know that I think they need to be framed, but I imagine some people do frame them. And that's okay too.
Some of your canvases are larger than earlier. How's the transition from smaller to larger?
Some of my new paintings that are like 6 feet by 8 feet, it's a big transition. And I paint them in my studio on the wall, and I have ladders, and I have big brushes, that I've duct taped to sticks so I can get back from what I'm doing.
The one of Narcissus, for example.
Yes.
Enormous. However, we couldn't really accommodate more than 2 of them.
So this is a good gallery for the small ones, and it's also like such a wonderful gallery with such interesting people come out and see the work and talk to you about the work. It's kind of become a gallery where a lot of things are shown early so that I can get some response and see what's happening with them. So it's great.
Great. Are there other questions on the chat? Ashley, thank you so much. You really
Thank you.
enliven everything and make life more interesting as you process it in your painterly way. So
Well, thank you for having me. I always like showing art. And thanks everybody who's watching from home.
thank you, our live audience. Thank you so
Happy
much.
to be here. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming out.
So we're open today for those of you who are local until 2 o'clock, and of course, every day with a phone call or text, and otherwise on Saturdays when Sarah will be taking care of things. So, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.